Hi, and welcome to the video on Unit 1 Scientific Skills and Density Performance Task. In this video, we'll discuss what a performance task is, the expectations for a performance task, and we'll discuss what you need to do for each part of the performance task, with particular emphasis on parts 1 through 3, which you'll be working on today. Let's start off with what a performance task is. A performance task is an assessment that, unlike additional tests, doesn't really test content knowledge, but it more tests your ability to think like a scientist. In this unit, you've been practicing scientific skills, specifically the ability to plan and conduct an investigation. And that's what you've been working on when you've been writing lab procedures for measuring the densities of liquids and the densities of solids, such as the gold coins. So since this is an assessment, the performance task is to be done independently, with the exception of actually conducting the experiment, which you'll do with your lab mates. So now that we've talked about what a performance task is and the expectations, which are to work independently on this assessment, except for the lab section, we're now going to talk about what do you need to do for each part. As I said, there are 5 parts, and the first 3 parts you'll work on today. So let's begin with part 1. Part 1 is purpose and prediction. In this section, you are going to write down the purpose of this lab and the prediction that you made in your launch today. So let's start off with the purpose. The purpose is outlined here in these 3 bullet points, and what you're going to do is you're going to read through these bullet points and synthesize the purpose in your own words. And that should be maybe in about 2 sentences would be enough to write the purpose in your own words. So once you have a sense of what you want to say, you're going to type the purpose here. So you can type out the word purpose, and you can begin. The purpose of this lab is to, okay. Once you're finished with the purpose, you can go ahead and start the prediction, which you're getting from your launch. So you can just write out here, I predict whatever object you predict to be the most dense because, and you'll do the same thing for the object that you predict to be the least dense and explain why. So that's going to go into this table here. Once you finish with your purpose and prediction, you're done with part 1, and you can move now on to part 2. Part 2 is the materials list and the measurements section. This is sort of where you write out all the materials that you think you're going to need for the lab. You'll type those in here, like maybe you think you'll need a beaker. Okay, you just type all those materials in this table, as we've done in the past. So you're just brainstorming what you think you may need. This may not be a complete list. Maybe you'll find later that, oh, I actually need to include a graduated cylinder or a pipette. So that's totally fine if this is not a complete list, but the idea is just to get started in brainstorming and thinking what you need. Then, as we've done in the past, whatever materials you think you're going to use, you're going to make a couple of notes on how to use those equipment safely, so that when you're writing your procedure, you have some idea of what you want to put into the safety section of your lab procedure. So again, you would type whatever sort of safety notes here. Remember, for the safety section, we use that lab equipment handout. That's a good time to use that. Finally, in the last part of this section of part 2, you're going to describe the measurements that you intend to take during this lab. Okay? And here are some sentence frames to help you, but you don't have to write it this way. Just essentially, what are the measurements you think you're going to take, or you're going to need to take? Now remember, you're measuring the densities of 3 different objects, so it would be a good idea to maybe have separate sections for, like, wood block, okay, and then list the measurements that you want to take for your wood block. Have a section for the marble and a section for the corn syrup. Now this section, the purpose of this section, just to be clear, is for you to start thinking about what it is you want to include in your procedure. This is a required section, so don't skip it, because it's going to show that you've thought about your procedure and this is your own original authentic work. Once you have an idea of the materials, the safety, and the measurements that you take, you're going to now go on to part 3, which I have to scroll down for it. So here's part 3. This is where you're actually writing your procedure. So it tells you here what your procedure needs to include for this section: a purpose, safety, materials, the procedure, which are the steps, and the data tables. Remember that you're measuring the densities for 3 different objects. So just as above, where you kind of had like separate sections for the measurements of all those 3 objects, you also want to have separate sections for the procedure and the data tables. Right? So you shouldn't have one data table for all 3 objects. There should be 3 separate data tables, one for the wood block, one for the marble, and one for the corn syrup. And the same thing with the procedure. You should have separate steps for measuring the densities of the wood block, corn syrup, and the marble. Notice that this section is blank right now. You're going to have to type in everything that you need. Your purpose, your safety, your materials, all 3 procedures, and all 3 data tables should be clearly labeled in separate sections. They all shouldn't be mixed together, just as you've done before. So if you need to refer back to an exemplar, you have that in Google Classroom. You also have your own lab procedure to refer to. All right, so that's what we're working on today, these 3 things, as much as you can get done. Whatever you don't finish today will be homework. So your purpose and prediction, documenting your thoughts on material safety and the measurements you'll need to take, and then also crafting out your own procedure for measuring the densities of the 3 objects. So that's what you're working on today. Whatever you don't finish, you will do for homework over the weekend, and it's due on Monday. And on Monday, we're going to work on part 4. And essentially what you're going to do for part 4 is, with your group, since you're all performing the same lab together, so the people at your table, you're going to do the performing part together. You need to pick one lab procedure, just as we've done in the past. So whoever lab procedure you just choose that you're going to use on Monday, you're going to copy down their procedures here. Again, there'll be 3 separate ones, one for each object. You're going to copy down the procedures there, and whichever data tables you're choosing to use for those three objects, you're going to copy those down in here. And then the reason why we're doing that is that so that on the Tuesday or Wednesday when you actually perform the lab, you have your procedure ready for me to print out, and I can give it to you so you can actually write down all of your measurements or any notes that you need to write down into on paper, and you'll submit that paper along with your performance task. Okay, so part 4 again is for later, it's not for today. And the last part that's for later, that's not for today, are the findings and reflections. So after you get all your data, you're going to communicate what you found, and it should really address the purpose of the lab. Last thing I want to show you is at the bottom here, there is a rubric, so you can take a look at that. For this lab, we're going to aim for 3. We're not aiming for 4 because we haven't talked about limitations of a lab so much. So we're aiming for 3 here, so that's the highest that you can get on this at this point. Okay, so I hope you have found this video helpful. What you're going to do now is you are going to go back to your handout for today, and you're going to type down any questions that you have, and also a summary of what you're going to be working on today. All right, folks, have a quality day.